Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. Here I am on Trafalgar Square in London. No, not Trafalgar Square in Barbados. Well, it's now called National Hero Square there. Anyhow, so you can see that the Christmas tree is here, and this Yule log has been provided every year since 1946 by the city of Oslo. So the Norwegians give it to the United Kingdom as a token of their thankfulness for British assistance in the Second World War. So Norway wished to remain neutral in the Second World War, as she had been in the First, despite having been married to members of the British royal family, some of the Norwegian royal house. But then again, of course, some of the House of Hohenzollern and the lesser German royal families were also married to the House of Windsor. But in April 1940, the Wehrmacht invaded Norway, because iron ore was vital to Germany's war economy. It was shipped out from Sweden, Swedish iron ore, via the Gulf of Bothnia in the winter, but that froze solid in midwinter and had to be taken out by train to Norway and shipped through the North Sea, because that didn't freeze. It was super cool water. Even as well below freezing, the Atlantic waves broke up ice. But so that's why it was invaded, Norway, and the French and British rushed troops to Norway, but to little avail. Anyway, no sooner had the German troops landed there than a man called Vidkun Quisling attempted to seize power. He was a former defense minister of Norway, he'd been an army officer. He worked for the League of Nations, and he'd been in the Soviet Union in the 1930s, and he'd seen the ghastly famine there, and that convinced him that communism was something hellish, must be resisted at all costs. He saw Nazism as the only alternative. So the German authorities accepted Vidkun Quisling as the ruler of Norway, but he was never popular. They later realized how unpopular he was. So although he was nominally the head of government there, the Nazis paid him little heed. The Norwegian royal family fled to this country, and they lived on Palace Green, Kensington. So I remember Churchill saying that Quisling, his name was a gift to the Allied cause, because its name somehow seemed to encapsulate the notion of somebody revolting, morally repugnant and treacherous, as indeed he was. And when the Germans in Norway surrendered, Quisling went straight to a police station and suggested that he be part of this new government of national unity. Well, he was executed at Akershus fortress the next year for his pains. So they'll be taken down on the 6th of January, the Feast of Epiphany, when the Yuletide celebrations are brought to a close. Jul, and it's Christmas in Norwegian. So there's the National Gallery behind me, and this was stables until this was laid out in the 1830s, this square, and it's the focal point of many concerts or Easter commemorations or celebrations at New Year. You're not allowed to bring alcohol in here, though someone I know has managed to smuggle it in. What else can I point out? Well, much of it is after the First World War became a memorial to various admirals, like we're about to see Cunningham here, a Scotsman, and then we're going to go on and see Jellicoe, because the Royal Navy was more important in the First World War than is widely appreciated, perhaps a decisive factor. The blockade on Germany was undramatic, perhaps unglamorous, but it was perhaps more effectual than anything else than grinding down the Second Reich. It was a very blunt instrument, and it involved depriving civilians of food, as well as military personnel. And I suppose we don't these days face up to just how horrific it is. It's not just soldiers being killed at the battlefield, it's elderly people, it's children slowly dying of malnutrition. Not dying of starvation in a couple of months, but the cumulative effect of an insufficient amount of food over 4 years, that will lead to such debility that they will die, or especially quite a minor illness could finish them off. And that is the ghastly reality that I suppose we don't wish to acknowledge. Now, obviously, depriving the enemy of foodstuffs is a tactic as old as this war itself. The thing is, I think the United Kingdom began that one in the First World War, as in they started doing it to Germany before Germany did it back. Obviously, you don't usually allow your enemy to do commerce freely, to raise money, because that's simply going to fund his war effort. So if it's particularly cold, these will be switched off, because the water would freeze and I suppose burst the pipes. Although it's -2 today, I don't get it. So many protests have been held there under Nelson's column, and I remember one time in 2003, that was September, hearing the second Viscount Stansgate hold forth there, and his oration was a denunciation of the liberation of Iraq. He far preferred it to remain in the hands of a genocidal tyrant who led the Socialist Party of Arab Resurgence, the Ba'ath Party, known as Saddam Hussein. Viscount Stansgate, he used to moonlight under the wry and witty stage name of Tony Benn when he wished to accrue some working class street cred. Now, there was a Don who taught me, Mr. Alexander Murray, and Sandy Murray said he was here in, I think it was 1938, that October, at a communist protest against the Munich Agreement, and they had an actor dressed up as Adolf Hitler and holding a piece of paper reading, "I promise to be a good boy." And he said the Cockneys loved it, and they were ridiculing Neville Chamberlain for his gullibility and his pusillanimity in agreeing to the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia, a faraway country of which we know little. Well, perhaps that's enough from Trafalgar Square. The fireball as it was in the Blitz. So it's the focal point of so much what goes on in London. Pakistan Independence Day celebrations, Indian Independence Day celebrations, Chinese New Year. All sorts of people have put up a stage in front of the Nelson's column and they do their bit. Now, legend has it that this little thing here is the smallest police station in the world. Well, I mean, just one person could sit in there, press a few buttons, not really a police station. One policeman could take shelter from the elements, and that's more or less it. So you see South Africa House hard by, as in the South African High Commission. It being a Commonwealth country, its embassy to the United Kingdom is actually called a High Commission, and the man or woman who holds that office, he or she, is called the High Commissioner, not the Ambassador. High Commissioner to the Court of St. James, since the official residence of Her Majesty the Queen is St. James's Palace, not Buckingham Palace. That's a common misconception. Well, more things I can point out to you. Right, behold yon temple behind me, oh God. The Route Master bus is going by it. You can see this mock Grecian temple with the Corinthian columns. There it's got that Doric proportion of 3:8 that the ancients thought really exemplified beauty. This is St. Martin in the Fields Church, and it dates back to the Middle Ages, though this is a late 18th century construction. Anyway, in olden days, the city of Westminster was perhaps a mile to the west of here. You can't see Westminster Abbey, that's a cathedral. Despite the word abbey, it is a cathedral. And the city of Westminster was there. Do you see right behind me the Sovereign Tower in Parliament, right down the street in the middle? So the city of Westminster was that way, whereas the city of London was about 4 miles that away. So in ancient Christendom or medieval Christendom, a cathedral had to have a city. London was a city, Westminster was a city. In between, there was countryside. That's why it's called St. Martin's in the Fields, because it really was in the fields. But obviously London grew out from around St. Paul's Cathedral, Westminster grew out from around Westminster Abbey, and obviously as well, long since been absorbed by them. There is no countryside around here. It's only about 1882 that Greater London was formed. They united the city of Westminster and the city of London and about 30 boroughs together, and they created Greater London. Because there's a county called Middlesex, which was much of the land north of the River Thames. And so Middlesex has really been abolished as a county. And then to the south of the River Thames, to the east, was the county of Kent, and to the west was the county of Surrey. And they took boroughs, as in towns, out of these counties and put them together, and that is Greater London. So strictly speaking, the city of London is only the area around St. Paul's Cathedral, about a mile in radius from there, whereas Greater London includes the city of London, the city of Westminster, and 32 more boroughs. Okay, not a lot of people know that. So look to the other side of Trafalgar Square, and you shall see the Canadian High Commission, as in same idea, Canada House. Perhaps you see, make out the Canadian flags, maybe not really. Bit of the red and white, the old maple leaf. Well, up high there's gold lettering, there's the word Canada, but perhaps it's illegible from this distance unless you have hawk eyes. Now, you might see this ancient Persian figure, this curious bearded chap with a hat of some description and the legs of a lion and whatnot. That's the fourth plinth, the empty plinth. And so it rotates, well, it doesn't spin around, but you know what I mean. Different people are allowed to have a go at displaying their artwork on it. And it's been like that since goodness knows when. Now, his predecessor, Bernie Grant, this Labour MP from Tottenham, he made a commendable recommendation, especially in view of his socialistic proclivities, and he said that this ought to be for the unknown slave, preferably a woman, since every other person here is of the male description, and the woman ought to be holding an infant. And I think it's a commendable idea, actually, because obviously this place extols imperial glory, but the United Kingdom also faces up to the satanic crimes committed by British people in bygone centuries, particularly against the people of West Africa who were abducted, and obviously involved violence. Many people were killed, shipped across the Atlantic in the most appallingly inhumane circumstances, reduced to thraldom, held under the lash for generations, and exploited to the fullest possible extent for the enrichment of some people who were already stinking rich in this country. So, you know, I absolutely adore London, and there's much about the United Kingdom I admire. However, I recognise that some British people are exceedingly wicked, and that's the curious thing, that civilization and savagery can coexist in the same person or in the same society. You take the late 18th century, this country was one of the most advanced in the world in terms of science and technology, and in some respects had a highly advanced culture looking at the arts of all kinds, but it was all based on the sweat and blood of slaves in the West Indies, these poor people of African stock who were mistreated in the most appalling and disgusting fashion. Every imaginable cruelty visited upon them, and people here, most people didn't really face up to that. When they did, they thought, oh, it was acceptable. They tried to say that certain people were not people at all, and that kind of thing, that somehow this was moral. So there we are, but we do the same today. We turn a blind eye and don't face up to the suffering in the world and just pretend it isn't happening or it doesn't count. We don't learn much, do we?